Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special segment discussing Putin's State of the Nation speech, which was delivered on February 21st of 2023. It wasn't a particularly interesting speech, but of course, we will go through it, we will break it down, see what was most important and most interesting there, and see what we can learn from it. Most of the speech was made up of two key things, those being normalization and saber-rattling. Starting with saber-rattling, there was a lot of focus given to how the West started the war, to how Ukraine started the war in 2014 with shelling of the Donbass, neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and basically how Russia was acting defensively and was, in essence, a victim. Also on this note, the speech promised Russia's withdrawal from the New START Treaty, a treaty limiting nuclear arms between the United States and Russia signed by Obama and Medvedev in 2010. Then the most prominent thing on the normalization side was the focus on the economy, and how the economy is doing just fine, actually. All good there. There was a lot of discussion of Western prediction of doom for the Russian economy, and the painting of the 2% decline in GDP as a great victory, which I think you can make an arguable case for that being a success, but the focus on it was particularly notable, not the painting of it as such, and a general optimistic outlook on the economy. Another thing which stuck out to me were two sections which seemed at least partially intended to appeal to the West, specifically Western political demographics, not Western governments. First was an appeal to a segment of the Western left which isn't so much pro-Putin as anti-Putin. Now, there was a point where he talked about how much the West has spent on aid to poorer countries and compared it to the increased, or I should say greater spending on the war in Ukraine, while also framing Western support for poorer countries through an imperial lens, saying that it was only given with the demand of obedience. There was also a segment meant to appeal to right-wing culture war narratives that talked about gender identity and the embrace of LGBTQ rights in the West, and specifically in regards to the church, mentioned the forcing of priests to bless gay marriages and the Anglican Church's idea of considering a gender-neutral God, his commentary on which was, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And to underscore the significance of his comparison of gay rights to the death of Jesus, he goes on to say that this is leading the West towards a spiritual disaster. Of course, neither of these pieces of the speech were directed entirely, or even necessarily primarily, at the West. There was a lot of thought put into the internal audience on this one, but there are definitely parts here that are also meant to appeal to groups abroad. Two final points on the speech. There was a discussion of improving benefits and pensions and all that for veterans, specifically for people involved in the special military operation. And there was discussion of fifth columnists and traitors trying to bring down Russia. This is not surprising, and given the rhetoric we have seen on this topic earlier in the war, this was fairly tame. Here he talks about fifth columnists. Earlier in the war, he talked about the natural and essential self-cleansing of society. He even goes on to make what sounds almost like a promise not to increase repressions based on this. As he says, "We will never be like the Kiev regime and Western elites who have been and still are engaged in witch hunts." So there again, an element of normalization, even though that has been fairly aggressively shown to be not true with the media censorship laws and fake news and discrediting the Russian army laws. Also, on the element of normalization, he promises that the regional elections in 2023 and the presidential election in 2024 will go ahead as per usual. As for the impact of the speech, I doubt anyone will be happy with it. For the West, it seems mostly like aggressive saber-rattling. For liberal Russians, the same. It seems mostly like the same old thing. Nothing particularly new or interesting or even promising. For the average Russian, I don't think it will be very good at all, because the normalization I don't think will be convincing, because they can tell that things are not normal, and it's kind of very hard to ignore at this point when mobilization has already happened. So I think they're looking for somebody, specifically for Putin, to tell them look, it's scary and things are not normal, but it's going to be okay. Nobody's going to come for you. Nobody's going to come for your family. Your sons are not going to war. We're done with all this. You can sit back and relax. You don't have to worry about this. And instead, he's trying to tell them, look, this is all normal. Don't worry about it. This is how things have always been. And I just don't think that that's going to be very convincing or very reassuring. And then, of course, we have the nationalists who are looking at this. They're probably thinking, okay, Mr. Putin, you're telling us that we're doing okay. We haven't lost yet, but we haven't won yet either. So what are you going to do to make sure that we win? How are you going to escalate this to make sure that this ends in a quick victory and so that this doesn't end in disaster? Because we don't just want to fight the war, we want to win the war. How are you going to make that happen? Give us a roadmap. And he just doesn't. He gives them nothing. So no one, I think, will be happy with this speech. And overall, I don't think it was particularly interesting or well-written or valuable in any way. As far as political speeches go, this wasn't a great one. This has been a special segment discussing Putin's recent speech, and thank you very much for listening.